Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening in again to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by Journeyman Smith, Brad Jansen. Something that's interested me about Brad and his work as he's introduced into the knife scene holistically is his penchant for very clean work, his production of slip joint pocket knives, and especially the work that he does in tooling. So, Brad, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, appreciate it, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
So, can you give me a little bit of experience with what you do for a living outside of knives, family, hobbies, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a CPA. That's my day job. I'm an accountant and live in Germantown, Wisconsin, and have two boys and a wife. My wife's a teacher, and I have a 4-year-old and a 13-year-old boy that I try to get in the shop as much as I can with me.
That is a fairly wide range for children.
It sure is.
Do you find issues parenting those different age ranges?
You know, when I had the first one, I wasn't that young. I was probably 28 or so, and life was happening really fast. So, I didn't get to appreciate all the things that I do now, 8 years late, much later on in life with a young boy. It's been a good gap, and the older one helps raise the younger one, so it works out pretty well for us.
Yeah. I'm one of 8 children, so I know all about raising the youngins. I don't think that my mom would have survived very long if it wasn't for us older kids, because the younger ones were pretty rowdy.
Yeah, I have one of those.
So, hobbies, otherwise, like outside of knives, I noticed that you like some hunting and fishing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I like hunting, bow hunting, traditional bow hunting. Hunt with a traditional bow. Used to make them. Do some fishing as well. Like jet skiing, like car stuff. I basically do anything other than like traditional sports, I guess, is what I really like.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Favorite fish being up there in Wisconsin?
I love catching those lake trout out on Lake Michigan. I mean, it's such a fun day to go out there.
Yeah,
that's probably my favorite thing to do.
They get pretty big up there, don't they?
They do. Yeah, it's awesome. You charter a boat, 6 guys go out there, and for the cost of the charter, you basically bring that in fish home. So it's pretty good if you have a good day.
Yeah. I'm kind of jealous now. I don't think I've ever seen any of your catches or anything like that. But I Pennsylvania, where I grew up, their state fish is the brook trout, and trout fishing and fly fishing and whatnot is pretty popular up there. So I grew up fishing all the time, and especially for trout. And I love the taste. I love the way that they respond on the line. And so I've never actually been lake trout fishing though. That intrigues me.
Yeah, it's fun. Come up. We'll do
it. Done. Let me convince my wife to we'll drive up there sometime and then we'll go fishing. Okay.
All right.
So what got you into knives?
So I guess it's really what got me into craftsmanship. So like when I was a young kid, my dad was a tradesman. I grew up in a blue collar community, and we would go to I would work with him on job sites, and I'd be on job sites and I would hear stuff like, oh, wait till you see the cabinets in this place. So-and-so is making these cabinets or this trim work, and it's going to be really nice because this person made it. So all the success stories I heard growing up were of craftsmen. So I would hear that stuff and I would think, man, I want to be a good craftsman. I want people to want my work. And from an early age, my grandpa had a wood shop, and he was retired for like most of my life that I know. And I would spend a lot of time with him in that wood shop. And he was doing woodworking. He taught me a lot of things. And that wood shop's still probably like one of my favorite places in the world to be, is in that shop. And so that's what I did. I grew up being a woodworker. I went to college. As soon as I got my own place, that's the first thing I bought: table saw, bandsaw, all the tools that you need to be a woodworker, and made all the stuff that a young guy would need, in a new house. So I made like all the furniture in the house, and we're always making stuff. And then since I hunted, my cousin gave me a Bear longbow, fiberglass laminated longbow once. And this thing was awesome, right? So I had it on display in my house, and I would look at this all the time. And um, one day I was looking at it and thinking, man, I could almost make that. I have the equipment outside to make thin laminations, and if I could taper them down. So next thing you know, I tried to make that bow. I was trying to figure out how to make that bow, and I made it. And then I went down a deep rabbit hole of traditional archery. So I made probably 100 plus bows and all kinds, longbows, recurves, and I was, of all the things I made in life, I probably did that the best, the bows. And when I was at archery shows, there were knife makers there, and sooner or later that bug bit me, and that was probably 10 or so years ago. And since then, I've been making knives, and of all that time that I spent in the shop, I probably spent half or more of the time making my own tooling. And I found that just to be just as rewarding. So, all the things that you need: heat treat ovens, forges, hydraulic presses, grinders, file, just, there's endless amounts of things that you can make. And that's been a lot of fun as well. And a few years ago, I started getting to slip joints, and I have found that that has been, the most rewarding, challenging, fun type of knife to make, and that's what I make mostly now.
Yeah. Transitioning from just getting into uh, knife making to going through the ABS journey, like
Yeah.
what started you on that path?
Well, I used to be on a website, Trad Gang, and there was a bow making forum, which I was always on, and there's a knife making forum. And the guys that were on the knife making forum were like Lynn Ray, Carl Anderson. They were ABS guys, and I would see their forged knives. So um, that's where I wanted to make. And so the first, when we got a knife making, we bought a forge. It was like this little horseshoe forge. And me and my buddy Doug Melvin, I remember one weekend we forged probably 30 or 40 knives. I mean, it was 30 or 40 of the junkiest knives you've probably ever seen in your life. But we did it, and we then started to focus a little bit more on quality versus quantity. But forging knives was, I thought, the way that you did it, because I saw the Lynn and Carl. That's what they did, and I I made knives in my shop for a few years and struggled with a lot of the things that I was trying to do. And then one weekend I went to American Bladesmith Society hammering, and I learned more in that one weekend than I did all the years screwing around in my shop. And I think probably because I spent a couple years in my shop trying to figure it out, and failing at certain tasks, and maybe some successes at certain tasks, and then seeing a different way to do it, it just clicked for me. And I came home from that hammer in, and then I started to make decent knives at that point, and that really progressed me through it. That's how I got into the American Bladesmith Society.
So, if you can describe for us, because I'm also interested, because I'm thinking that that's really like something that I want to make my next challenge, is getting into the ABS. Can you talk to us a little bit about like the process of joining the ABS and what you have to do for your Journeyman Smith certification and everything?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, joining's easy. You just sign up, and I think my recommendation is sign up and find somebody in your area, right? Reach out to them and introduce yourself. This is a group of people that will really help you out. There's not a lot of secrets that they keep, right? They'll show you how they do things, and a lot of them will have you over in their shop if you're in the area, and they're just nice people. Um, for the Journeyman Smith test, I went through this with my buddy Thad Stager, and he and I made bows together back in the day, and we started getting into knife making at the same time. He lives in Pennsylvania, and I'm in Wisconsin, so we're half a world apart here. But we're good friends, and we went through that process together. So the process is you have to be in the ABS, I think, for a certain amount of time. Let's say a couple of years. I don't know the exact rule. And then you have to make a performance test knife. And a performance test knife is a knife that's 15 inches maximum, 5-inch handle maximum. And it has to do a few performance tests. It has to slice a free hanging rope that's not attached to the bottom. So slice off the bottom of that rope, chop through a couple 2x4s, and then it still has to shave hair. So that tests your heat treat on the edge, and then you have to bend it 90 degrees without it breaking, which is also a test of differential heat treat. And after you pass the performance test, then you're able to put 5 clean knives in front of Master Smith judges. I think 7 judges come through, and they pass or fail your knives. And if you get a majority pass, you make Journeyman Smith test.
So that's intriguing. So what qualities do you have to look for on your performance knife specifically to meet, like, to tick all those boxes? I know that, like, differential heat treat and everything, but so you have to do like that 90-degree bend. Is that something that you're tempering back the spine and at the ricasso area to do, or are you just is that specific to how you're actually quenching the blade?
You could probably do it either way. And I know a lot of guys will just heat treat the edge by quenching only the edge. I hardened my entire blades, and then I put the edge in water, and I blued the back, 3 or 4 times. The 90-degree bend test appears to be the most difficult and stressful test. And it is kind of, you're anxious going through it, but it's actually probably it's not that hard to get that. You need a thin knife. A thin knife will bend, right? And you need a soft back, and that's easy to do as well by bluing the back. So that part isn't too difficult. So in the performance test knife really isn't that difficult. If you've been making knives for a while, the 5 clean knives is by far, I would say, more difficult, challenging, time consuming. It's not really a battle against, it's not that you can't do it. Most knife makers that I know can make a clean knife, and they probably make 5 clean knives, right? But once you start making them, it becomes like a battle against yourself. If you make a knife and there's a small flaw on it, and it's like, God, is this going to fail me or not? So, and then you make another one, and you keep making them and making them. So I end up making 9 knives. I worked on it for a couple years. We were initially going to test during the year of COVID, and that got canceled. So at that point, I had 6 clean knives, and over the next year, I made a few more and took only my best ones.
So I'm trying to think here. When it comes to the actual process of making the knives, do you feel like a knife maker should have all the forging equipment inside of their own shop, or do you think it's something that they can accomplish by like utilizing hammer-ins or buddy shops or things like that? Like, how much, like, what's the level of involvement that you have to have with forging blades continuously in as your shop focus in order to get to the place where you can actually get your Journeyman Smith certification?
I don't think the forging process is that, of all the things that you have to do to make those 5 blades, that's an important step, obviously, but you could do that at buddy shops. You could do that at hammer-ins. You could do that at, you don't have to have all that equipment to do it. Most of the time is spent at the bench. It's the fit and finish, and that's what the master smiths are really looking for on the knives. They want to see clean knives, symmetrical, um, nice flowing lines, no minimal mistakes, right? No knife's going to be perfect, but minimal mistakes, and um, that time is spent at the bench.
Yeah, I think that is one similarity with getting into the guild, where I think that they really are focused towards that last 10%. And
Yeah,
what I mean, that really is kind of honestly the difference between lipstick on a pig and really expressing your craft is how far you're willing to go to get that good enough state.
right.
And I think that's one thing that we really focus on. I've done some inspection testing for the guild for other makers, and Honestly, so I did it at Texas this year, and I saw some really impressive work. It's crazy,
Hmm.
because you don't think we don't have the performance test component, and there's not as much one-on-one mentorship through the guild inspection process, which is something that maybe they could rethink as an organization. That's like how involved you are with getting good makers acclimated to
Yeah.
the inspection rigors. But man, there was not one blade that came by my table that did not just look phenomenal. I'm like, man, like I'm glad you guys didn't see my inspection knives. Like, not saying that there was anything wrong with them, but I noticed like everything, and I was like, I just don't know. Like maybe you see some just very slight difference between your like some symmetry of your grind lines or whatever
Yeah.
at your sharpening choil or whatever, right? It's like one scratch on a bolster that just showed up when you put it in a sheath, and you should have put it in a pouch or something. So
Right.
I always get really self-conscious about those things, because when you're having somebody else inspect your work, it comes down to like, well, could I have done something different to make it better? And I think that's where I spend a lot of my time on the bench, is just wondering like, how can I push this just a little bit further to make it extraordinary versus passable, is what I feel.
Yeah. And it ups your game to see those other knives, and it's hard to get good feedback too sometimes, So, and I tell you what, that helped me going through it with Thaddeus, because we gave each other honest feedback of what we could see. We never saw our knives in person, and we and it pushed us along. As I could see he was progressing, it forced me to get in the shop and do the work and do better work. And I'll tell you a good story about this. So we were making, all of our knives, and we made a bunch of them. And let's say March 2021, we were done. He had a set of 8 or 9, and I had a set of 8 or something like that. And we had plenty. We were good. We had enough knives such that if we dropped one, we could replace it, and they were all clean. And it was like we were relieved. It's over. Now we just have to go to the test. And he said, "All right, let's make one more." I'm like, "Oh, Thaddeus, I don't want to make one more. I mean, we're done. Let's just move on." He said, "Listen, let me draw a knife, and you have to make it look like the drawing, and you do the same for me." And what he was doing is trying to push me out of the comfort zone to make something different. Because if you looked at my knives, and you look like, and not a lot of knife makers' knives, we tend to make similar designs. So I drew him a Brad Jansen fighter knife, real long clip, sleek, smooth handle. And he drew me a Bowie knife that he would make, really short clip, big belly, more of aggressive looking handle. And we made those knives. So we show up at Blade, the night before the test. And this is the first time that we're seeing each other's knives in person. And Thaddeus unzips his suitcase, and he has 10 clean. I mean, he has 2 sets of Journeyman Smith knives. They would both pass. They're perfectly clean. And we're inspecting the final knife that we made. And we found just a very insignificant flaw on that one that I designed. And I said, "Oh, Thaddeus, we've worked so hard on this. Don't even put it in." I said, "Listen, you have all these knives. These are all slam dunks, and this one probably is too, but why take the risk?" And he said, "No, I'm putting it in. We went through this together. I'm putting that knife in. I don't even care if it fails for this, which I don't think it will, but I'm putting it in." And he ended up winning the Joe Kiesler Award for best knife presented with that knife. And and I was so happy, because he put in so much work on those knives, and he had 2 clean sets of knives. I mean, I doubt anyone else had that. So he got a 7 out of 7 pass in the award. So it was a great ending to our story.
Oh, that's great. And it was 2021 in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
Do you know, do they do the inspections at the Blade Show in Texas as well? I thought that they might have done them, but I can't remember exactly.
I think they started it that year, and then I believe this year they're also going to test in Ohio at the Blade Show, or the Hammer in there, that weekend.
Oh yeah,
So they're opening up a few other options.
yeah, that'll be interesting. Actually, funny enough, the person that preceded you in interviews was Lynn Ray, and we were talking a little bit more about their So by the time that this airs, it'll be it'll be last Saturday. But
Okay.
it's this Saturday the 17th that they were recording this. That they're going to, or it'll be the 17th, so this weekend, where they're actually reopening a museum in Arkansas to exhibit a new Bowie knife exhibit. So it's basically showcasing Arkansas knife
Oh,
makers
okay.
and their
Oh, great.
contribution towards like the Bowie aesthetic and everything. So I think that'll be interesting. And I've always really been fascinated with blade smithing because, man, there's a lot of things that you can do with a big chunk of steel and stock removal,
Yeah.
but drawing out and using materials in blacksmithing and being able to do that in bladesmithing has always been interesting because there's lots of things that you just cannot do functionally in stock removal um, without milling or whatever. I mean, Steve Johnson has an example of a fully integral Big Bear fighter,
Hmm.
and it's just like a ton of mill work to try to knock everything down and build those the sub hilt and everything for it. And I've always been really fascinated with the capabilities that are associated with bladesmithing over stock removal. So, um, what do you feel like your trajectory is for your master smith? Are you currently working on your blades for that, or have any particular ideas on how you're going to address that?
I hope I get the initiative to start it for real. I haven't gained it yet. I haven't actually made a forged blade with my JS stamp on it since I got back. I started working on slip joints because I wanted to work on slip joints before that, and I was so focused on getting those done. I came back and I started making folding knives. So I have made my Mastersmith Performance test knife already, and that's ready to go. And I forged a uh, Bowie knife, a fighter for eight. I don't know if it's going to make the cut or not, but I've kind of started, but I don't have the initiative right now to do it, and I hope I get that one of these days. And maybe if Thaddeus starts, it'll push me to it.
Yeah, well, you have to do that, right? I mean,
And I would have to then, yeah.
so what is a I know specifically that the Quillian dagger is in the presentation set, but what are the others? What are the other requirements for your other blades that you have done?
So you still have to have five blades. The Quillian dagger has to be Damascus on with a pattern. Um, I Two of the blades could be folding knives if they have Damascus blades. Um, and the other ones I think just have to be clean knives. I mean, I don't know all the rules offhand, but I don't even think some of the other knives have to be Damascus. But I've never seen a set or most sets, are all Damascus and all pattern Damascus. So it's the best of the best. I mean, you can't skimp on anything on that. And the year that I passed JAS, there was one mastersmith that made it that year. Jordan, I think he was 29 years old at that time. His knives were so clean. I just look at him and I think, God, I'm just so far away from that at this stage. I mean, he had knives that I'd pick up, and I know there's three pieces to the guard, but you could not tell if that was the same piece or not. It was just flawless. And his dagger was absolutely outstanding. It was probably one of the nicest knives I've ever held. I mean, it's beautiful. So you have to bring your best of the best to get through.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things. Like, I mean, I I really do wish that the guild was more like that in some ways. I'm not going to say it was easy to get in, but after I spent 5 years making knives, and really pushing myself, I didn't feel like it was unobtainium, right? To be able to at least be inspected for the guild. But lots of encouragement and lots of advice on from the probationary phase to the voting member phase. But I don't know if it mirrors the same exact sentiment of the ABS in that you have to be good to pass your journeyman smith. And I would say that that expectation on quality of work is analogous to what we expect in the guild.
Hmm.
But to go to a master smith, I've seen some master smith work that was submitted for the guild, and it's one of those times where it really just boggles your mind with how the fit and finish is, and how intrinsic that is to the entire build process. Like
Yeah.
I don't really see a lot of examples of master smith preparation or whatever where you can take you know a knife and shine it into a master smith blade. Whereas I think that if you spent enough time and dedication on your blades for journeyman smith, that maybe you could turn something that is not as um, maybe well thought out in the beginning, and you can craft it into a blade that makes journeyman smith. But there's really no room for error throughout the entire
No,
process for master smith.
that's
Like,
right.
and
Yeah.
I think that I'm not. I really don't mean in saying that to marginalize the qualifications for any for the tiers, but it's just
Hmm.
it seems like it is a lot of effort for Master Smith, and when you can put that MS on your blade, you have earned it wholly and like to a high level of satisfaction. And I don't really know necessarily if I'm being like quasi critical of how we do things in the guild. That I don't really necessarily feel that same way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's be an unbelievable personal accomplishment that, it'd be great to do. So,
Yeah. And I think that's probably what interests me in the next leg of my knife journey is I feel like I spent quite a lot of time focusing on making sure that my knives were good for guild inspection. But I really do think that I would be interested in joining that the fanaticism of um, fit and finish and just being able to produce a good blade that the ABS demands, and
yeah.
being able to have an MS stamp. And as a lofty goal, I think, I mean, I'm 7 years into knife making. I make a pretty decent blade. um, I think that the next progression in that is to be able to surround myself with mentors and other people that are really pushing that personal envelope, and to be able to see how far I can get in that myself. I think that would be a really great challenge. So I appreciate you providing some insight, because there's lots of knife makers I think out there that listen to the podcast that are looking for direction, especially as we kind of see this economic slump, where
Hmm.
selling knives becomes more complex. It's like, well, if I'm going to make a knife, and selling is so difficult, how do I make a knife that just is an expression of myself versus one that's marketable? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when it comes to slip joints and everything, I've seen your work and it's great. What are your favorite patterns to make, and what specifically about slip joints do you find intriguing or irritating?
Yeah. So slip joints are incredibly simple yet incredibly complex. It is odd that so few pieces can sometimes go together so easily, and sometimes it's just not going to work. My favorite pattern, I really like the gents trapper pattern. It's especially if you make it with real thin scales, rounded. It's just a very small knife, and I like that trapper blade. But I rarely make. I don't think I've ever made two of the same slip joints. I have a hard time making the same knife over and over. So the great thing about slip joints, there's so many patterns out there, right? And when I first started, I looked at a Barlow and I thought, I ever want to make a Barlow. And I made a Barlow this past year. I love that thing. I want to make another one, right? So a doctor's knife. Um, that's another one I want to make. Improved muskrat. I have one on my bench now. It's been there for a year. I still have to finish that. So there's just endless patterns, and the slip joint community, or the folding knife community, shares a lot of patterns with each other, right? We help each other out, and I got a lot of my patterns from friends, right? Other slip joint makers. They freely give them. And I think that's really cool. It's unlike the modern knife, I think, community, right? It's a little different. It's not wrong to make a pattern that's been given to the world to make.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most challenging component that a lot of people don't think about if they're just collecting slip joints is the flush in three positions and what that actually takes to accomplish that. Because even if you're pulling your fingernail over the
Yeah,
spring, if it's just a tiny bit off, it's not right.
I know.
um,
And it's only
and
like a half thou.
yeah, and well, and if you think about traditional cam tang pocket knives, you only had to worry really about whether it was flush in the open and closed position. And when you have that third one, and then anything you do to the kick can sometimes affect its
Oh yeah.
operation in the
Oh yeah.
half. And it's like, I think that the geometrics of slip joints has always interested me. Because I mean, even in liner locks, like you think about like from a geometry perspective, the most important facet of the mechanism is the lockup and detent.
Hmm.
You could kind of tune around things, but that if the lockup is not right, then it could lock up too quickly or too slowly, or it could get uh, lock up at that area, and then the detent to make sure everything's stays closed the way they should. But slip joints are just kind of an enigma on how to get them right and how that perception of what right is has changed over time.
Yeah. And that's why it helps start with a good pattern. Because if you draw them out yourself, you can make a functional knife, but it won't have all the fine tuning that a good pattern would have. And you can get a pattern from another knife, a junk knife, whatever, take it apart. And, the tang pattern is really important. So I use a lot of the same tang patterns because a lot of the knives I make are about the same size, so I can utilize that tang pattern to draw out a new knife. And that really helps in the process.
Yeah, I wish I wish there was some better establishment on what kind of patterns are good starter patterns, because I feel like the Tony Bo Zulu spear is a really good starter pattern.
Hmm.
And because it pushes you to be able to apply draw swedges. If it looks right. The draw swedge is can make or break the way that the spear tip actually looks, and the tang geometry is probably one of the most straightforward ones. So like I learned on a few trappers and things like that first that were just uh, scribed from old patterns, like actual functional knives. And then when I got into the Zulu spear, I was like, man, I wish I would have just started with that, because it seems like everything makes sense, and it's not like it's hard to mess up the geometry or anything. But I think that it's probably one of the most straightforward patterns that I've ever experienced using.
Yeah, I agree. That's an awesome knife.
Yeah, it looks good. And well, the good thing about it is, it's good either as a shadow pattern or as a bare bolster.
Yeah,
Although I do not think I have seen one example of a cap and bolster Zulu spear, just because I think it's probably because Tony mostly produced it as a bare bolster at most, with like fluted bolsters. But
right.
I've never seen a cap and bolster, but it would be interesting to see that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think I've ever seen that either.
Yeah. So, um, tooling, I know is an important part of your makeup and everything. And I'll be honest with you. I think I became most aware of your work through your tooling, as opposed to your knives. But I've been following you for a while. But the things that have intrigued me the most is when you started producing stiddys for pocket knives specifically. What
Yeah,
got you into that? And I mean, I think that's the first question. Is like, what really got you into making stiddys of all things as tooling?
yeah. I don't know exactly how I even came across a city. I probably saw it on a forum or something, or maybe an old video. But it just caught my eye, because First of all, they're just cool looking. A stiddy's basically a mini anvil that you use when you're making a knife on the bench. And, we're talking about something that's like 3 inches tall, 3.5 inches wide, inch and a half deep, something like that. So it's small. So it had the cool factor, and they're very useful. I would find myself when I was peening together knives, I used to have a piece of railroad track on my bench, and I don't know what it weighed, let's say 20 pounds. And it was hard to move around all the time. It was always in my way. And it was nice to be able to use that rather than walk over to my anvil, which at that point, I'm probably like kneeling on the floor, right, trying to peen together a slip joint, or even using like a bench vise. A lot of bench vices have a little flat spot on the back, but that's awkward too because the vise is in your way. So I wanted one to use, and I also wanted to make them because they look cool. So there's not a lot of history out there on them, and we were talking before about finding some history on it. I can't really find much. If you search for cutler stiddy on Google, you'll find some really good photos of them. If you want to see one used way back in the day, go to YouTube and search for pen knife cutler. And what you'll see is a 30 plus year old video of Stan Shaw assembling a penknife in Sheffield. And he's constantly going back to that stiddy on his bench. And he's got, in the stiddy that you'll see in that video, he's got various holes in there so he can punch a pin through the knife handle out the other side and then clip it. And then he's using it for peening and all kinds of various tasks. It's nice to have it right there. And that's what's convenient about it. And you also notice that thing is just beat to heck, right? I mean, it's probably not even a hardened piece of steel. It's just so beat up. But you can see them used back in the day in Sheffield. And I don't know if there's too many, I don't know if anybody really makes them any anymore. So I started making my own. And I have them around here. I use them all the time. I do not attach mine to the bench. I keep them floating so I can take them off and on when I need it.
Yeah. I don't have one of your traditional stiddy versions. I have your peening anvil,
Yeah.
um, which I I think that I when I bought John's shop out, he had a few anvils, like stiddies that looked like cutler stiddies that were made by somebody, like milled out from old,
Hmm.
like small anvils that probably not hardened either. But I to get your hands on one of those traditional style stitties is actually pretty hard. What made you decide to go to the cylindrical peening anvil versus continuing to manufacture these anvils or like the traditional stitty?
Yeah, so after I was making the stitties, the traditional stitties, which is a surface ground flat top, and I was peening together the slip joints on there, I found myself still going back to that big railroad track because it had a nice natural railroad track has a crown on it. And the crown mitigates the opportunity that you're going to ding your handle material when you're peening that together. And therefore, that's what I used. And I still want to get rid of that thing because it was always in my way. So I had some 4140 round stock. And I thought maybe I could just tap that in the bottom, chuck it up in my hand drill, and go to the grinder and make a dome. And I'll harden that and I'll just use that on the bench. And it'll be easy to move. It's only a couple pounds. So that's how I got started with that. Um, or I could have even seen it somewhere. I'm not sure, but I don't know if anyone else makes those. But it's a really simple tool and it's very useful. I use them on every slip joint I have because it's got that crown top that doesn't get in. Just it's useful for not getting in the way. And so I started making those, and I use both of them on every slip joint. I use the stitty and the peening anvil.
Yeah. Well, sometime if you get into the mood to make a bunch more of those stitties, I'll pick a one up from you because again I don't have any good examples of stitties that are hardened, where I can go back and forth and use it. I really honestly, whatever these things are made of is definitely not hardened, and it's kind of a little bit janky side as far as like it tips over if you hammer on it too much,
Oh yeah,
and there's no place to fasten it. So kind of
yeah.
kind of a little bit scary at times if you're really using it for something that you need to.
Well, after I made the first couple out of, I used just square blocks of 4140. I drew up a one piece design like that. And so it's a one piece design. It looks like an anvil from the side and has that thin lip on it. And I made it because I have a machinist friend, Greg, and every once in a while, not often, but every once in a while, he would text me and say, I'm slow at the shop today. If you need anything made, let me know. And so I was always ready for him to text me that. And one day he did. So I sent him my plans and drawings and dimensions, and he milled one out on his $300,000 CNC machine or whatever, a solid S7 one piece stiddy, and it was jackpot. I mean, it was beautiful, and this is one I use all the time. And then so I told him, listen, if you make more, um, I'm sure people would buy them. So he ended up making six for me, and those are like the six that you see like posted on Instagram. And I think I maybe one or two of those left, but they're solid S7. So he
Yeah.
really did a good job on those.
What is a anvil like that cost in general from you to buy?
So those peening anvils, I was selling for I don't know 150 or less. They're not super expensive. The stiddies, I told Greg, I mean, I paid $400 for them, and that's where I was selling them to the world for. It was just trying to get some out there. There's no profit in it. He told me after he made those six, he says the last six I'm making. So it must have took a long time, but he got all the money from it. He kind of did me a favor, and they're good to have out there. It'd be nice if someone would make them. If someone could make, I'm sure if you made a ton of them, you could actually make them in a profitable way. But it's hard to make small batches of anything.
Yeah, because I don't think that it's cost effective to get a big chunk of S7 where you could just water jet it out at the
No,
on the
I don't think
profile,
so either.
yeah, and then finish mill the faces or whatever. Because I mean, a big chunk of S7 like that would be tens of thousands of dollars probably.
Probably.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's one thing I've dabbled as a tool maker, like selling stuff for other people, and I hate it. Are you familiar with pin presses?
Pin presses. Oh, for like making pins?
Well, no, it's for pressing pins in like bolsters, for like doing bolster work or whatever. It basically consists of a bottle jack and two bars that go up vertically, and then you have another two bars that slide on there with springs in between them. And the bottle jack elevates the bottom bar, and that has an anvil on it, and the top bar usually has another anvil or like a conical anvil, where you can press pins together when you're doing bolster work, or you
Okay.
can you can put like a stamp in there. Like I have one
Hmm.
that's fairly modular, that you just have to have the right. I think it's a 3/8 hole in the top and bottom, and you can make little tools that you can use your bottle jack
Oh yeah.
and presses. But I was making them, and I think that you can functionally make one for maybe like $285 in materials. And I was selling them for $400 because of how much time it takes to tap everything and clean it all up and whatnot. And it has to be uh, everything has to be drilled true, in order to be able to align it with the vertical rods and everything. But I just couldn't like there was no real profit in it, because after I factored in the total amount of time that it took to make that stuff over the material, I was just like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Like I can't
Oh yeah.
economically do
Without
it.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's probably what most people find with making tools. It's like Tim Robertson and Tyler Turner had made those jigs to fit scales together.
Yeah,
and the carbide faced, drilled and tapped and hardened and everything like that. And it's like indispensable as a knife maker to be able to use those things and not have to mess up handle material. But the upfront cost to somebody to manufacture tooling sometimes is so high that you just can't. I mean, we're a finite market of knife makers and then slip
that's
joint
right.
makers on top of that and everything. It's almost like you're almost not able to really make any profit at all. Maybe, I guess maybe if you can put your name on it and get some notoriety through making tooling, it's worth it. But not like don't quit your day job and making knives.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, um, I I'm interested in what like your trajectory is beyond like your. I mean, we talked about Master Smith a little bit, but I mean, kind of what's next for your knife business? Like, what areas are trying to push yourself into? Uh, I don't know, to differentiate yourself. I noticed that you don't have a website. I mean, do you sell everything that you make direct to consumer, or do you work with dealers, or how exactly are you taking the knives that you manufacture to market?
I normally just post a picture of them on Instagram, and guys will reach out, or gals, and ask if it's available, and I'll sell them that way. But you know what? I don't make a ton. I mean, I don't make more than probably 20 knives a year, I would say. In the summer, I'm really not out here that much. I got too many other things going on with work and other stuff, golf, whatever. And in the winter, I'm out here every chance I get. Fire. I start a fire on Thanksgiving, and I don't think that fire goes out until into January. You know, I'm out here a lot. It's great. I crank out a lot of work. Trajectory wise, I don't know. You know, I do this for fun. If I would get an order for two knives, you know, that would become work for me. So I very rarely try to take an order. I hate taking orders. Um, Even if I could sell 100 stitties, I don't think I'd want to make 100 stitties. I want to do this for fun. What I figured out in all this stuff that I've done, whether it's woodworking, making bows, knives, it's not that I'm infatuated with the product itself. Like there's a lot of knife makers that absolutely just love knives. You know, they've carried a knife on them for 30 years. That's not really where I'm at. What I figured out, what I like about it most is being able to design something and seeing if I can make it. And after I figure out that I can do it, I want to move on to the next pattern or the next tool or the next challenge. So so my trajectory is probably just making more new stuff. Really, that's all I'm in it for. That's what's fun for me.
Yeah, I haven't looked at so you've done some multi-blade work, right? Like two blades. Have you thought about trying to push into the three, four, five blades?
Yeah, you know, five blades not on my mind. Four, no. I need to make a three blader next. Yeah, that's on my to do list for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'd be fun.
I've always really liked the Stockmans, and
Yes, they're very cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would say like the five blade sow belly and the three blade Stockman are kind of like my, if I could quintessentially mark a place where I'd eventually like to get. But I don't know. Like your improved muskrat. Have you gotten to the point yet where you're doing catch bits or anything?
Yeah, I have catch bits right in front of me. I'm thinking about basically drilling and tapping those in to the four six or for the to the liners basically, right? I'll make interval bolsters on it, and I think I'm going to use an 080 screw and screw that on such that the pivot's keeping it in place in one screw, such that I can take it apart, get everything flat, and then finally put it together. That's the way I think I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am. Yeah, there's some interesting challenges around catch bits and like the overall dimensions. Like I've just wanted to be able to make a muskrat that uses their own separate springs versus try to cram everything into a smaller space with catch bits and everything.
Yeah.
There's man something I really admire about the cutler, where they could find ways, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with bladesmithing, where there's ways that you can finesse metal to your liking because you heat it and beat it. But like the old cutlers where you can have like tapered springs, right? Like geometrically, if you try to figure that out, just with doing stock removal, there's so many variables that are beyond comprehension. Like how exactly
Right.
do you do this as a machinist? But I've pulled apart some, traditional forged blades, and there might just they might have a very small catch bit in like nickel silver or something, but then they also have a tapered spring in addition with that, and everything looks so good with it banged together. It's almost I don't know how they figured that out, like and what level of craftsmanship, even in production,
I
traditional
agree.
like slip joints. To me, it's like I don't know. It makes like that's the one thing about knives. I think that I'm always humbled by how um, sophisticated the thought is for something that is seemingly so utilitarian and simplistic.
Yeah, and all for a knife that back in the day cost like 97 cents or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I mean, because some of the knives that I've broken apart couldn't have been more than $1. There's
That's crazy.
an old Henkel like multiple blade. It was a I think it was a sleeve board. It was a very unique type of pattern. I haven't seen anything else out there like it, and so I bought it and took it apart. And taking it apart was just a an exercise in frustration because, like, to try to mimic that same thing that I had in my hand um, inside of the knife shop, I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it. But when I get enough time in the shop, I'm going to try
All right, good.
it. So, uh, as we wind down, I usually ask my guests if there's pieces of advice that you could give, like new makers or intermediate makers, especially. What are those? What are those things? And obviously, I get uh, everybody who answers that question has a kind of unique take on what advice or imparting knowledge is. But what is yours? I mean, you've been through I think a lot of different components of tooling and knife making and everything. And you can answer for as many components of this
Hmm.
craft as you want to, but I'm really fascinated to know what your answer is on that.
Yeah, I'll give a few short pieces. So first is, I think find a friend, companion, mentor, find somebody that does this stuff that you want to do. You'll learn. It doesn't have to be a master smith, right? You'll learn from someone that's just doing the same things that you are and going through the process together because you'll learn together. That's one. Two is go find what good work is, get it in your hands, look at it. I learn a lot by I can make a knife and think it's great, and then I'll go to a show and I think, God, I'm not even close, right? I mean, this my slip joints were boat anchors, compared to some of these super like how thin a scale really needs to be. What should a spring actually feel like when you open it? Those are hard things to try to figure out on your own. It's great to see others work. And then the third one is it's I think when I do presentations on knife making, I say there's three things that will make you a good knife maker. One, you have to figure out how to get things flat. Two, you have to be able to work to a line very precisely. And then three, and the most important is you have to order your operations. Really figure out how you're going to get something together. And what I learned going through the Journeyman Smith test is I could order my operations, and we all know kind of an order operations after we make a few knives, but a lot of times you get the urge to jump to the next one. I'll mess with that guard later. I will polish that blade later. Because you're so excited to get to the next step. What I learned through the Journeyman Smith process is do not move on to the next step until you're absolutely totally satisfied with the current. And doing so really will make you a better knife maker.
Yeah, I agree. I found that once the handles are on, one of the points of no return. Which I mean, that's order
That's
of
right.
operation is like you have certain points of no return, and I I think it was when I was having my knives looked at for getting into the guild, like just putting in for probationary status, like not the actual probationary inspection, but like showing my knives just to be able to apply. And there were some comments around 2-inch grind lines and hiding pins and things like that. And I was like, man, I don't know if I should just scrap these things and start over, or if I can actually make something out of these things. And surprisingly enough, there are ways to actually get around points of no return. But to me, it just seems so much simpler to do it right the first time and to not.
Yeah.
But I think that's what maturity in knives and craftsmanship actually it teaches you is make sure that you know what your order of operation is, know the lines of delineation between points of no return and the reasons why they're there. Like finishing blades or refinishing blades to me just is a lot more difficult when you have bolsters or scales on it, because there definitely limits to how far you can go up the ricasso or things to even out scratches and other things like that. So that is really good advice.
Yeah. Great.
Well, I mean, I appreciate your time and getting the opportunity to talk with you. It's a pleasure. I really, if you're interested sometime in going fishing, I'll see if I can make it up that way.
Yeah, do it.
And hopefully I can see you again. See you at a knife show sometime soon.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be at Atlanta next year. We'll have to see how tables and things like that look. But I'm trying to get a table for Texas, and I don't know if you ever come down this way. But if you decide to, one of these days, the Texas show is actually second to Atlanta. Is actually a really great knife show.
I would love to go to the Texas show. I need to do that one of these days. Yeah. Yeah, we'll meet sooner or later, Aaron, for sure.
Yeah. Well, if you decide to come down to Texas, when you decide to go to a knife show, just plan a little bit extra time, and we'll go down to South Texas and we'll fish on the Guadalupe for Guadalupe bass.
All right. That sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks a ton.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.